Hello my friends. Hello my friends. Today we're going to talk about how the Americans used blanket to infect natives with chickenpox. Before we start, please like and subscribe so you will be notified when I upload new videos. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please write them in the comments below. Now let's get started. Chickenpox is an infectious disease which is caused by the varicella zoster virus. It spreads through the air by coughing or sneezing, or it can also be spread by direct contact with the rash. Symptoms include fever, headache, tiredness, loss of appetite, sore throat, and a distinctive itchy rash that goes through 3 stages: flat, raised, and then pustular. Chickenpox is more serious in adults than children. The older you are, the higher the risk of complications. Smallpox was one of the most feared diseases in human history, killing millions of people each year until its eradication in 1979. Although smallpox has been eradicated, another disease called chickenpox still occurs around the world, especially among unvaccinated people. So how did this happen? How did smallpox turn into chickenpox? Smallpox has a very long history, and there is evidence that it occurred in ancient Egypt, China, and India thousands of years ago. One of the oldest known examples of smallpox was found in the remains of an Egyptian pharaoh who died in 1157 BC. During the 2nd century AD, Greek and Roman writers described a disease that they called varicella. This was probably smallpox. For many centuries, smallpox continued to ravage populations around the world, killing millions of people. In the 18th century, a British physician named Edward Jenner discovered the first vaccine against smallpox. He noticed that milkmaids who contracted cowpox, a mild disease related to smallpox, seemed to be immune to smallpox. So he vaccinated a young boy with cowpox and then exposed him to smallpox. The boy did not develop smallpox, and this marked the beginning of vaccination. Over the next 150 years, vaccination campaigns led to a dramatic decline in smallpox cases worldwide. By the 20th century, only 2 countries remained where smallpox was endemic: India and Nigeria. In 1966, the World Health Organization launched a global campaign to eradicate smallpox. The last naturally occurring case of smallpox was identified in 1970, and in 1979, the Director General of the World Health Organization declared that smallpox had been eradicated. This was a major public health victory. After smallpox was eradicated, another disease began to emerge. This was chickenpox. Chickenpox is caused by a virus called varicella zoster, which is related to the virus that causes smallpox. But unlike smallpox, chickenpox is usually a mild disease. Most people recover from chickenpox without any complications. However, chickenpox can be dangerous for pregnant women, newborns, and people with weakened immune systems. So how did chickenpox evolve into smallpox? It all started in the early 1900s, when scientists began to study the virus that causes smallpox. They soon realized that there were actually 2 distinct viruses, one that caused smallpox and another that caused chickenpox. The virus that causes chickenpox is very similar to the virus that causes smallpox, but it is much milder. Scientists believe that the virus that causes chickenpox evolved from the virus that causes smallpox. This happened when the virus that causes smallpox mutated, a process that happens randomly over time. When the virus mutated, it lost some of its virulence, which is its ability to cause disease. As a result, the disease became much milder. Some people who had been vaccinated against smallpox still had immunity to chickenpox, because the 2 viruses are related. But over time, this immunity waned. In the United States, cases of chickenpox began to increase in the 1960s. This was partly due to the fact that people were no longer being vaccinated against smallpox. In 1966, the US stopped routine smallpox vaccinations. By the 1990s, cases of chickenpox had reached epidemic levels. In 1995, there were over 100,000 cases of chickenpox in the United States. This led to the development of a new vaccine against chickenpox. The chickenpox vaccine was first licensed in 1995. It is recommended that all children receive 2 doses of the vaccine. The vaccine is very effective and has led to a dramatic decline in cases of chickenpox. But before the vaccine was developed, chickenpox was a common disease. In fact, it was so common that most people had had it by the time they were 10 years old. Chickenpox is highly contagious. The virus is spread through the air when an infected person coughs or sneezes. It can also be spread by direct contact with the rash. Symptoms usually begin to appear 2 weeks after infection. Fever, headache, tiredness, and a loss of appetite are the common symptoms. Then, a distinctive itchy rash begins to appear. The rash goes through 3 stages. First, it is flat and red. Then it becomes raised, and then it turns into fluid-filled blisters. The blisters eventually burst and scab over. Chickenpox is usually not serious, but it can be dangerous for pregnant women, newborns, and people with weakened immune systems. People who develop pneumonia, which is an infection of the lungs, or encephalitis, which is an infection of the brain, are the ones who need to be hospitalized. Now let's talk about how the American used blankets to infect the natives with smallpox. The use of contaminated blankets as a method of biological warfare was employed during the colonial period in North America. This occurred in the 18th century when European colonizers, particularly the British, sought to subjugate and displace indigenous populations. The introduction of diseases to which Native Americans had no immunity had a devastating impact on their populations, contributing significantly to their decline. One well-documented instance took place in 1763 during the French and Indian War. The objective of the British was to eliminate the threat posed by the alliance between the French and the Native American tribes. Biological warfare was deemed an effective means to achieve this goal. Smallpox blankets, which were used to intentionally spread the disease among Native Americans, were acquired by the British. These blankets had been used in the colony of Boston and were taken from patients suffering from smallpox. By distributing these contaminated blankets among Native American populations, the British aimed to infect them with smallpox. The impact of this biological attack was devastating. Native Americans had no resistance to smallpox, and the disease spread rapidly through their communities, causing widespread death and suffering. The use of contaminated blankets was just one tactic employed during this period to spread disease among Native Americans. Other methods included the use of infected clothing and a direct inoculation of individuals with smallpox matter. These actions were part of a broader strategy to weaken and subdue indigenous populations. However, the use of biological weapons in this context was not universally accepted. Some colonists opposed the practice, viewing it as unethical and inhumane. Nevertheless, it continued to be used throughout the 18th century, contributing to the high mortality rates among Native Americans. The deliberate infection of Native Americans with smallpox had a profound impact on their populations, leading to catastrophic consequences. The introduction of this disease, to which they had no immunity, resulted in widespread death and suffering. This biological warfare tactic, employed by colonial powers aimed at subjugating and displacing indigenous populations, had a devastating impact on their way of life and contributed significantly to their decline. As we reflect on this dark chapter in history, It is important to remember the devastating consequences of such actions and to recognize the resilience and endurance of Native American communities in the face of these challenges. And now, I'm going to tell you a story. Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there was a great war between the settlers and the natives. The settlers were a powerful and ruthless people who had come from across the sea with dreams of conquest. The natives were a proud and independent people who had lived in harmony with the land for generations. For years, the two peoples lived in uneasy peace. But as the settlers grew in number and power, they began to encroach on native lands. The natives fought back, but they were no match for the settlers' superior weapons and tactics. The settlers were winning the war, and the natives were being pushed back into the wilderness. Desperate times call for desperate measures. And the settlers had a plan to defeat the natives once and for all. They would use a weapon more deadly than any musket or cannon: disease. The settlers knew that the natives had never seen smallpox before, and they were determined to change that. They would infect the natives with smallpox and watch as their numbers dwindled. The plan was put into action, and it worked all too well. The natives had no immunity to smallpox, and the disease spread like wildfire. Whole villages were wiped out, and the survivors were too sick to resist. The settlers had won the war before a single battle was fought. In the end, the natives were gone, and the settlers had conquered the land. But what had they gained? They had gained a land that was empty and lifeless. The settlers had destroyed the very thing that had made their conquest possible: the native population. As the settlers began to explore their new territory, they came across something that made them stop in their tracks. It was a blanket that was covered in sores and pus. A blanket that was used to spread disease and death. The settlers knew that this blanket was a symbol of everything they had done to the natives, and they were ashamed. From that day forward, the settlers made it their mission to honor the natives by preserving their culture and protecting their land. And so, the cycle of hatred and conquest came to an end. And now I'm going to tell you a joke. Why did the chickenpox virus cross the road? To infect the other side. All right, my friends, our story time is over. I hope you enjoyed the story and learned something new. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories. Until next time, goodbye.